Hello everybody, thank you for having me here. There's been a lot of talk about a cold house unionist, but I've had a very warm welcome here tonight. Sorry, bad joke. Really bad joke. I wouldn't be considered a natural advocate for Irish Unity. I was brought up as a working class Protestant. And a lot of that's to do with my upbringing. I wouldn't have considered myself to be anybody who would consider Irish Unity as something to advocate for. I've lived in Ballybean, I've lived in Sandy Row, and I live in the Shankill, all places that aren't exactly Republican heartlands. But over time, I've begun to think about what unionism means to me. You know, I've always been brought up to believe that the union is there to stay, that God save the Queen, Orange Order, etc., etc. But as somebody who considers themselves a socialist and coming from a working class background, that no longer has much tact with me anymore. You know, I'm an anti-monarchist, working class, I'm a trade unionist, I'm a socialist, and those things aren't really hand in hand with considered unionism. I would be as far from the DUP as you could probably imagine when it comes to the spectrum of unionism. As an openly gay man who's married, I'm not exactly considered election material for Arlene Foster and the DUP, but there is a wider spectrum of unionism that is outside mainstream unionism. The problem with unionism is unionism. If you guys want to win a referendum on unity, let the DUP lead the other side. It's as simple as that. But we'll talk about that a wee bit later on. I'm the kind of demographic that I believe that Yes for Unity and advocates for Irish unification need to convince to support a referendum that is successful in reuniting the island. I have no idea when a border poll will happen, but it will happen. That much is pretty much guaranteed. Given that Brexit has been an absolute shambles, and the disregard for Northern Ireland or the North that's been shown by not just the Tories, but by and large the British political establishment, shows that they don't give a good goddamn about this place. But again, I'll talk about that a bit more about that later. The issue with having a border poll and unionists refusing to be involved in the discussion is like demanding to know why you haven't arrived at the destination and then deliberately missing the bus. You can't influence these discussions unless you're in the room. So I'm very glad to be here tonight, and I'm very humbled to be asked to be here to talk about this because it's something that's very important to me. My issue with Irish Unity is that if there's a border poll tomorrow, there's too much hurt, too much division, and too much mistrust and skepticism in this part of the world for it to be successful overnight. And that's on all sides. That's not just me having a go at republicanism. Unionism has a lot to answer for as well, as does the British state, without putting too fine a point on it. We need to know what the new state would look like, and I know that Colin has just said that we'll have questions that we can't exactly answer on what a new Ireland would look like in terms of the nitty-gritty, but those are the types of things that will convince moderate unionists and moderate Protestants to vote for unity. And it may not be your target demographic, but they will be the ones that influence the outcome. People who vote Alliance, people who vote Green, people who vote centrist parties or don't vote at all, they're the target demographic here. And it has to come down to things like what taxes will be, the anthem, the flag, the constitution, what role the assembly will have in any kind of transitional arrangement, what will happen to pensions. Those are already boring questions that I don't have the answers for because I'm not smart enough to answer those questions, but those questions will be asked. We've learned our lesson on having a referendum without a clear-cut answer on what things will look like on the other side. If Brexit has demonstrated anything, it's that we're not very good at running a referendum in this part of the world. So we need to have a sensible conversation about that isn't dictated to by the extremes on both sides. If you have a referendum that has Arlene Foster on one side and Michelle Green on the other, you're just going to push people further apart. You're not going to bring people together. But again, that's not our fight to really win. That's not Republicans' fight to really win. That's up to the political establishment to decide what it wants to do about a border poll. There also is too many elements in republicanism to kind of cohese, and I know that Colin mentioned that a minute ago. There needs to be a united approach, a coalition on what unity will look like. There can't be 55 different questions and 155 different answers on what a new Ireland will look like. And uncertainty will just breed people voting against it. Look what happened in the Scottish independence referendum. People didn't know what was going to happen. so they didn't bother to vote for it, or they actively voted against it in large numbers. But another point that I want to bring up is, for me as a working class Protestant, and I wouldn't call myself a unionist in the same degree as the likes of Steve Aiken or Arlene Foster, but Irish Unity wouldn't be something that I'm uncomfortable with. But my issue is around socio-economic rights and human rights. If you don't have a socialist state, all you will change is the colour of the flag, and all you will do is move the capital 100 miles south. I work with homeless people, I work with heroin addicts, I work with people who are on benefits. Those people will still face the same issues if the border disappears. Poverty won't disappear overnight, division won't disappear overnight, deprivation won't disappear overnight. Those things need to be addressed first before there can be any successful unity referendum or unity project. This is going to be uncomfortable as well, but there has to be consideration given to what happens to expressions of cultural identity on both sides, but specifically around unionism and loyalism as well. What happens to the Orange Order? What happens to bonfires? What happens to cultural expressions? Are those still allowed to happen? Will people still be allowed to commemorate events and commemorate their dead? And that's both Republicans and Loyalists as well. I don't know how the Republic will cope with having an influx of people that 57.6% of themselves consider themselves to be Northern Irish overnight. That's what? Over 1 million people who consider themselves British to be incorporated into an Irish state overnight. There will need to be accommodation given to what they consider to be appropriate cultural expressions of identity. And that's going to be really uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about. It's going to be uncomfortable to talk about people who want to keep their UVF murals on the side of their wall. It's going to be uncomfortable people who want to have Orange Order parades march through the Ardoyne, because they're uncomfortable now, but unless we get to grips with those conversations before there's a referendum, they're not going to go away. To quote or misquote a famous Republican politician, they're not going to go away, you know. So we need to have a serious conversation about what those would look like. You know, division and sectarianism won't disappear with postcodes and the 02890 numbers overnight. So my point is that there is a lot more work to do before we get to a point where a border poll can be considered successful. And I don't know how I would vote in a border poll. I would need to see the detail of what a new Ireland would look like before I could be comfortable to do that. And I speak for quite a lot of young, moderate Protestants and Unionists that would consider themselves to be probably quite soft on the constitutional question, but when it comes to socio-economic rights, we don't compromise. And it's a very difficult space to occupy whenever somebody considers themselves to be unionist but also a socialist. How can you stand over being a socialist while supporting a colonial state? So there's been a lot of reconciling done within unionism, and I don't mean the DUP and the Ulster Unionists, I mean people like myself who are actively considering what a unity project will look like, not to support it, but thinking this is going to happen, whether we are involved in the conversations or not. So we need to be taking seats at tables we're invited to and making sure that our voices are heard. Otherwise, they won't be, and we can't then complain and say, well, this isn't the Ireland we voted for, if we don't participate in the discussions and try and shape the narrative. So I'm going to cut myself short here and hand over, because I think I've said all I need to say at the minute. I'm really looking forward to the questions and getting into the proper debate with you. And thank you again for having me tonight. It's very, very good.